Welcome to the Sewing Machine Repair Guy. Come learn with me. Today we have a Brother Project Runway machine with a problem which I found out is pretty common with these brothers, specifically Project Runway, but also some of their others. Together we'll learn how to fix it and how to get it back running properly. Here are the symptoms. And unfortunately I didn't get video of this, but I'm going to try my best to describe the problem. Basically what you end up with is an error code. I believe it was E6, and it tells you that the motor is locked up. Also, the machine won't sew fast, so it either won't sew at all or it'll only sew very slowly. And then if you try to go faster, it'll make some weird like kind of noise there, and it sounds really bad. And it just moves really slowly at that point. This machine came from a shop. It was used quite a bit, well loved and well used. The owner does take very good care of her machines, and every night when she was done with it, she would clean it out, vacuum and blow it out, make sure that she got everything out of there. And we'll see once we get into the machine how well it's been cleaned out. One thing about these machines is they're not really made to be used as much as some people do. So if you sew every day, and you're one of my customers that had the same or a very similar machine was she sold things on Etsy, and the customer who owns this machine actually works in a shop where they make things. So if you're doing high volume sewing, you really should invest in a industrial sewing machine. And I know that there's some drawbacks to that. First off, it's way more expensive, but also you don't get as many options. So an industrial machine does one stitch. One of these machines you get a few different stitches, which is pretty nice. You also have the bells and whistles, the needle threader, and it does a lot of this stuff for you. All right, so we're getting into it. We're right now showing you, it's not too bad in there, especially for a machine that gets used every day. And you can see some dust and things underneath there, but it doesn't look too bad. So I do start with the needle plate area and get all that stuff out of the way when I'm taking apart my machines. And then one thing I noticed with this machine is that it seems like every screw is a different size and type of screw. It holds this machine together. And then the second one here, that one right there, don't pull that apart. You don't have to pull that screw out. And then I realized I couldn't even get it back in. So there's actually a bracket on the other side that kind of pulled itself away. We'll fix that later. Just that's not a screw that needs to be pulled off. The rest of them do. I do like the Brother machines in their ease of disassembly. You don't normally have to pry with tools to get the machines open, or at least this machine. I believe some of their other machines you do. But all right, I disconnect I pulled those wires out of their holders. So now I'm showing you the top there, the two connectors that have to be pulled out, and then my fingers right now are pointing to where the wires were routed. And sorry I didn't get video of pulling the wires out of the router or the routing areas, but you'll see when we put them back together later. And then there's two connectors. You just kind of wiggle it a little bit and it comes right out. Same with this one. These connectors have different number of wires connected to them, so you can't mess it up when you're reconnecting them. And then there's the front cover, and then the rear cover. You can see the motherboard there and some of the other stuff. So what I do is I start to look over the machine and get an idea, see how clean it is and see how dirty. Now look at the rust right there on that lower shaft, and then you can also see the dust. So even though she cleans it out every night, you do have to take the machine apart to clean it. So this is why I recommend taking it to your local sewing machine repair guy to get them cleaned out every so often, annually for the home gamer, and then probably every 6 months if you're doing this, using your machines a lot. So then what I do is I start moving it around and looking to see if I can figure out where the problem is. In this case, we said that it was difficult to turn, and you can kind of feel that in the handle, and the motor's current is higher than it should be. That's why the computer is shutting down the motor and throwing the error code. So I'm just moving it and looking around and seeing if I hear any squeaks. Yeah, seeing if I hear any. I'm listening for squeaks, and then I have just noticed something that doesn't look right. So let's look up here. We're checking for thread that might be stuck in any of those connections, and then look, that gray part under the silver, that's a bushing. The bushing should not be moving. It should be stationary. So the upper one, the bushing was stationary, wasn't moving. The shaft was moving inside of it. In the bottom one, you can see the entire bushing was moving. That's not right. That's actually not what you want to see, and that is the reason why the motor is working too hard, because that bushing is stuck to the shaft of this machine and is rotating into the plastic retainer where it's mounted. The machine has 4 of those bushings. There's 2 on the bottom shaft and 2 on the top shaft, and that's something that you want to look at and see. And we got to figure out how to free up that bushing. But first I want to get to cleaning the machine, and then getting some lubrication going, and then we will see if we can free up that bushing. And again, looking at all those linkages in the upper portion for thread that's been wrapped around and torn. A lot of times you see that, and you may have to run the machine backwards while you're trying to pull out the threads with your tweezers. In this case, we don't have any, so that's good. So inside this machine, it has 4 of those bushings. So there's 2 on the top shaft and then 2 on the lower shaft, 1 on each side. And those things require oil. So when you have this machine and you've been using it every day for a year without oiling those bushings, then you're going to have problems, just like this lady had with this one. So the machine requires you to take it to a service technician to pull it apart and to put drops of oil on all these parts that move at least once a year. Especially if you're using it as frequently as every day, then you may want to go twice a year, because this machine really wasn't built to be used that much, and it also wasn't built as a industrial machine. And then another thing I don't like about this machine is the fact that the entire frame is just plastic. There is no metal frame on this machine. And there are machines these days that, even though it's plastic on the outside, it still has a metal frame on the inside. So I know that it's a strong frame. In this case, you can have problems with adjustment. So some machines require very close adjustments, some of them to the fraction of a millimeter. And when you have a plastic machine and it can flex, then you're not going to get good stitches out of it. So when I'm looking for the cause of a machine that has difficulty turning, there's a few things that I do. First, I'll slowly turn that hand wheel and I'll look and listen. Listen for squeaks, look for rubbing, maybe thread buildup or foreign objects, things like that are in there. And then the other steps that I take, I didn't have to do with this machine, but I can talk you through a few of them. Like if your machine is difficult to turn, sometimes you need to what's called half splitting. So when you're troubleshooting a machine electrically or even mechanically, you want to half split. And so sometimes if I don't know if it's the upper shaft or lower shaft, I'll end up pulling the timing belt off, and then I can rotate each shaft individually. And at that point you can find out, hey, is it the upper shaft or is it the lower shaft? And then you just split the machine in half and you figured out, hey, one of those two shafts is my problem. And then further troubleshoot from there. In this case, we were lucky and we could tell just by looking at it that the bushing was frozen to the shaft. So these bushings, a lot of times when you see machinery, bushings are made of a soft metal, usually brass, and then the shaft will be a chrome plated metal shaft. In this case, this plating is very thin, especially if you see rust coming through, because chrome shouldn't rust. It's the metal underneath leaching through that's rusting. All right, so now it's time to start taking this apart. We're pulling off that bearing cover, or the bushing cover, to get to that bushing and try and free it up. So I'm not exactly sure what I'm going to do when I get this cover off. If you have any ideas, please put it down in the comments below and we'll see how we end up getting this bushing freed. One thing that's always handy to have is a magnet. Whenever you drop a screw down into a machine, those magnets save the day. I don't like having to turn a machine upside down and try and fish out a screw. This cover also has a little spring attached to it, but that's not too big of a deal to get that spring off of there. There we go, spring's off. We got the little bushing cover off, and now we're looking at the bushing. So I'm going to try and hold it with my hand and see if I can free it that way. And yeah, that's not doing it. So now I'm trying to figure out what course of action I want to take. Looking around at my tools, trying to see what's the best tool to use maybe. Let's try this wrench here. This is sliding lock pliers. And they're too big to fit in there. There's the lower timing belt shaft or gear is down there, and it's really close to this bushing. So that's where my problem is, trying to find something that'll fit in there to hold on to that bushing. Now I can pull this whole shaft out, but I prefer not to do that just because it will mess up the timing, which is not a huge deal, but once you start pulling things like this apart, you buy yourself into a much longer recovery process of adjustments and everything else. So still trying to think of what's the best tool. Maybe you have an idea. You can put that in the comments too. Because I will tell you, fingers, not doing it. All right, so maybe these needle nose pliers, if I can get them in there catty cornered. Yes, that's the one right there. So you just kind of push them down catty corner, these needle nose pliers, and I was able to get it to move. So I'm going to put a little bit more oil in there. This TriFlow works really well to leach, or not really leach, but to wick itself in there. And I'm going to put a link in the description there for the TriFlow. I use this TriFlow. I learned it from some other YouTubers, and I love it. It works great because, you know, that 3-in-1 oil over time, over the years, will gum up and it'll make your machine actually worse. But this stuff is like a penetrant. It penetrates in there, it gets in there, and it's loosened this thing up already. I'm going to keep putting a little bit more because I want to make sure we get all the gunk out of there that's in there. There's corrosion that's built up inside there. We want to get that out. The only long-term solution for this machine is to buy another machine. Because replacing that bottom shaft and bushing and all that assembly is going to cost you more than the machine costs. So this is not a long-term, like years-long solution, but this will get this machine back in operating. for, you know, a few years to come. Getting that spring put back on the bushing retainer bracket. Now we're going to put it back together. So what I'm going to do now is, once I get it together, we're going to run it by the motor to make sure it's freed up, and then we're going to run it for a little while to make sure that we get all the other gunk out of there, and then we'll come back in, we'll clean out some of that gunk, oil it again, and then be good to go. But this actually turned out to be a relatively easy fix, and like I said, this is not going to be a long-term machine. This is not going to be a machine that lasts you 20 years like Grandma's machine did. They don't make them like that anymore, so they make them like this. And I didn't finish going through and lubricating the whole machine, so I'm going to continue to do that. Remember, anything that's rotating on itself or any sort of connections that move against each other need to be lubricated. This is probably as good a time as any to just say I appreciate you guys watching my videos, and if you do like it, please subscribe, like the video, and make some comments. Let me know that you're out there and you like what you see, or let me know if you don't like what you see, because I can change it. Yeah, one thing right there you couldn't see very well, but I did poke it behind the motherboard there and lubricate that top bushing back in there behind the motherboard. And now we're speeding it up. Just clean the edges and sort of things before I put it back together. And now we want to get into cleaning the front here, which I didn't do when we first took it apart. And then also the one thing you want to get really well is this tension assembly up here. Don't forget about that. The tension assembly always needs to be clean. This is your upper tension, and that's what you adjust whenever you adjust the tension on your machine. And you want to make sure that between those two plates is clean. You don't have any frays or any sort of thread stuck in there, anything like that. I spent a lot of time troubleshooting one machine, and then I found out that there was just a piece of thread stuck in the tension assembly, and that's why I couldn't get the tensions right. So I also like to shoot a little air in there. And I'll use isopropyl alcohol to clean off the plastic on the outside. And then here you can see I'm hooking up the connections to mate the front back to the other half, the front half to the back half, I guess you could call it. And then I'm routing the wires where they came from. You didn't see me unroute them, but now you can see me put them back where they should be. So let's plug it in and let's see if it works. Oh, wait a minute. So it may be hard to see on the video, but the plug is bent, and I've got these parallel pliers which work pretty well to fix that. The jaws come down parallel to each other, and they're used a lot for jewelry, but I found that I've had many of uses in sewing machine repair where they've come in handy. So I'll put a link for those down in the description. Here it goes. Look at it go. There it is. It's working. I'm just testing now to make sure that any of the grime buildup is removed from the bushing. Making sure that the gunk is going to work its way out since we've got the oil in there. And then after this, I'm going to wipe out that gunk. So that's why I didn't put any screws to put it together. I'm also going to feel that bearing and the bushing and make sure that it's not getting real hot. That's an indication that it's definitely not cleared up yet if it gets real hot. So I'm just letting it run for a little bit. After it runs for a while, like I said, I'm going to pull it back apart. I'm going to wipe up that area where some of that gunk has worked its way out of that bushing. And then I'm going to put some oil on the rust spots there, right on the shaft next to the bushing. And since I'm just doing these few things, I don't need to take the front panel off again. So there we're getting the gunk. Put a little oil on there. And then just kind of move it around with the rag. Now there are some other things that I checked on this machine, and I haven't done it in this video just because it's getting so long, but you also have to check the alignment of the needle and the presser foot and all those components to make sure that they're aligned properly. With these machines that are plastic bodied, they can get out of alignment pretty easily. So just keep in mind that I did go through and check all that stuff as well. And here we are, I'm using all the different screws for all these places to put it back together. And then once we get it together, we're going to do a test sew and see how it goes. So instead of skipping over a bunch of stuff, I do actually fast forward through a lot of this. Let me know if you like that, or if you'd like me to skip over, like, you know, putting the presser foot back on, if you think I could save some time there. I know these videos are kind of long and you're sticking with me. I'm trying not to be too boring, but that's kind of my nature to be boring. So, all right, now we're testing the stitch to see if the stitch is good. And when I do this, I go through a lot of stitches. I don't just do one stitch typically. So, and of course I forgot to show you the stitch. Shame on me. We'll get it next time. And again, isopropyl alcohol. So one of the things you got to worry about or be concerned with or pay attention to with isopropyl, if you have an old Singer, or even newer Singers, if there's red printing with the word Singer, you know, their name in red, that easily comes off with isopropyl. I'm not sure why the red is different than the other colors, but you can wipe pretty much anything with isopropyl except for the red color that Singer put on there, like back in the 50s, 60s, 70s, 90s, 2020, you know, for some reason, whatever the red ink is, it comes off easily with isopropyl, so be careful around that. But I do like to make sure that the machine is clean on the outside when I give it to my customers. You know, if you take the time to clean the inside, you also need to clean the outside of the machine. And when someone gets a machine and it's dirty on the outside, they're not going to feel like you did anything. So make sure you clean the outside. About my videos, so I do use affiliate links for products that I use for sewing machine repair. These aren't products that I'm selling. They're products that I get a small percentage if you tend to buy it. But I'm only going to put links for things that I actually purchased and I actually use on my own. And it'll help me make future videos like this one. If you enjoyed what you saw here today, please subscribe and press that bell. Let me know what you would like to see in the comments. Should I review new sewing machines? Should I review vintage sewing machines? Should I restore a vintage machine? How about industrial machines? I have a ton of ideas for this channel, but I would love to hear what you would like to see. You can find me on Facebook and at sewingmachinerepairguy.com. Thanks for learning with me today. I hope you enjoyed it.